He toasts the woman he left me for while I unfold the letter that ends dinner. The champagne flute catches the overhead light, refracting a momentary sparkle against the cream-colored ceiling. Daniel lifts the glass with a rehearsed flourish, elbows slightly bent, wrist perfect. He used to do that at galas. At weddings. At our wedding. Now he does it for her. Haley leans into him just enough to press her arm to his, eyes wide, teeth bright. It's the kind of smile that photographs well. But there are no phones out now. Just forks, napkins, and the low hum of betrayal beneath the candlelight. My fingers are steady as I reach into my handbag. I don't look up. I don't need to. I've rehearsed this moment in silence so many times, it feels like memory. I pull the letter out slowly. Folded twice. The way I always fold letters I plan to read more than once. He says something. A joke, maybe. I miss it. Everyone chuckles out of obligation, not joy. Lydia, sitting across from me, doesn't even fake it. She shifts in her chair like she's heard too much already. I place the letter beside my plate. Not in the center. Not dramatically. Just enough that it touches the stem of my wine glass. The paper has a slight curl at the edge. I press too hard with the pen. Ink carries weight if you let it. Haley's laugh is sharp, like broken glass rolled in sugar. I look at her finally, not to meet her eyes, just to register her. Dress, silk, off-white, low neckline. Necklace, gold, subtle, not hers. It used to be mine. Daniel says, to fresh starts. His voice is smoother than I remember it. Like he's been practicing that line for weeks. To beginnings, Haley echoes, tilting her glass toward his. I don't lift mine. Lydia shifts again. Her husband Daniel's brother isn't here. Business trip. Lucky him. I slide the letter forward. Haley doesn't notice right away. She's too busy clinking her glass against Daniel's. But Daniel notices. His hand pauses mid-toast, the angle of his elbow freezing like a photograph. His eyes drop. The smile remains for a beat too long before it flattens. The letter doesn't move. I let it speak first. What's that? He asks, voice thin, almost joking. Paper, I reply, looking him in the eye for the first time that night. It remembers better than people do. Lydia breathes in through her nose, sharply. She doesn't exhale for a while. Haley sets her glass down gently, like a performance. Should I? She starts to ask no one in particular. I unfold the first crease. The sound it makes soft, fibrous, is louder than his toast. I don't speak yet. I let the table settle. I let the tension lean forward and hang. One fold left. It's strange how quiet a dining room can become when truth walks in the door, wearing paper shoes. I think of all the times I've bitten my tongue until it bled. All the times I smiled through ultrasounds with no heartbeat. All the times Daniel said, "Don't worry, it's not you." Then blamed me in private. I think of the prenatal vitamins I flushed. The baby shoes I never bought. The insurance forms I couldn't bring myself to file. Then I think of her. The mistress. Sitting 3 chairs away from me, hair curled, skin radiant, unaware she's become a name on a document. There's a photo on page 2. I printed it in black and white on purpose. Color would have been too generous. I unfold the final crease. I folded the page twice, like I always do. But this time, I let it unfold in front of them. Daniel clears his throat. Haley watches the letter as if it might bite her. No one says anything. The room, full of people who once passed dishes and told childhood stories, is now silent with expectation. I don't read yet. I want the image to settle. White paper, blue ink, my handwriting. The truth, patient and small, waiting to be invited. Haley finally breaks the silence. Is that for me? No, I say. It's for everyone else. Daniel shifts in his seat. He reaches for his wine, but the glass tips slightly before he grabs it. Lydia looks at the paper, then at me. She doesn't blink. Daniel's voice lowers. Emily, not here. I keep my eyes on the letter. You toasted a lie. I'm just letting it respond. They say the body remembers pain before the mind admits it. Mine remembers with paper. Every year on our anniversary, I wrote Daniel a letter, a real one. Ink pen, no typos. Folded once for formality, twice for intimacy. He never wrote back. Never said anything. One year, I found the envelope unopened in his desk drawer, still sealed, like I was the joke. But I still wrote the next year. It was the folding that mattered. I started folding letters like that when I was 10. My father had a temper made of whiskey and secrets. When he hit the table, I wrote my mother a letter, folded it twice, slipped it into her purse. She never mentioned it. But that night, the yelling stopped. And for 2 days, she made him sleep in the truck. That was my first lesson in silence that speaks louder than screams. I never stopped folding things that hurt. Letters, test results, divorce paperwork, my sister's, not mine. And eventually, the prenatal rejection form that told me my uterus was not favorable for implantation. To have a meaty price is not many weight. Please is not a D. 3 folds on that one. Then a match. Daniel didn't hold my hand in the car after that appointment. He just said, "We'll figure it out." Then he drove through a Wendy's and asked if I still wanted fries. Somewhere between the second and third failed cycle, he stopped asking. He started getting busy. Started looking cleaner on Thursdays than Mondays. Started locking his phone. Started to laugh in ways that didn't reach his eyes anymore. There's this thing that happens when a man stops looking at you like a wife and starts looking at you like an employee who missed a deadline. You start shrinking. Not all at once, bit by bit. Like the corners of the page curling in before it burns. I folded the page twice, like I always do. But this time, I pressed the crease like it was a wound I needed to keep from bleeding out. The night I wrote this letter, the one in my purse right now, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even pause. I wrote it on his company stationery. Blue ink. Left margin aligned. No run-ons. Then I reread it aloud once, without blinking. And folded it twice. No third fold. Thirds are for retreat. This one needed to open easily. I kept it in my drawer for 3 days. The first night, I dreamt about handing it to him in the hallway. The second night, I dreamt I mailed it to Haley. The third night, I didn't dream at all. That's how I knew it was ready. The dinner invitation came like an accident engineered by fate. Lydia texted a group thread. Family dinner next Friday. Daniel, bring the wine. Emily, the dessert? Haley can join? I waited 23 minutes before replying. I'll bring lemon squares. And a folded truth. The day of the dinner, I baked early. Measured everything. Let nothing burn. Set the lemon squares in a glass dish lined with parchment paper, like I was burying something sacred. Then I pulled the letter from the drawer, checked the folds, and slid it between 2 recipe pages in my purse. I looked at myself in the mirror. No lipstick. Just lip balm. Hair pinned back. Eyes steady. Widows don't always bury the man. Sometimes they bury the illusion. Daniel, you sure you want to go? You've been quiet lately. Emily. Quiet isn't the same as absent. Daniel. Still weird you and Lydia are close again. After she, Emily. We've both watched you perform long enough. This does not make stain. Daniel pauses. Squints. Daniel. Everything okay? Emily smiles. You tell me. The next morning, he left early. Said he had a meeting. I checked his calendar online. It was blank. I printed the HR report. Ref number 22 to 471. Filed September 18th. Complaint initiated, Haley M. Category: Internal Conduct, VP level. Funny how files leave footprints that people forget. I added it to the back of the letter. One staple. One truth too many. That's what no one prepares you for in marriage, the forensic work. You become part detective, part mortician. Investigating who died first, the love or the loyalty. I wasn't there to fight anymore. I was there to eulogize. The night before dinner, I sat in bed alone. Daniel slept in the office. Claimed he was finishing a quarterly report. I watched the fan spin and tried to remember the last time I believed him. The last time I felt small and didn't question it. The last time I folded a letter hoping it would fix anything. Now I knew better. This letter wasn't a repair. It was a reveal. People say paper is fragile. But it's the only thing that never lies when you fold it right. It started with the wrong city. Daniel told me he'd be in Chicago for a conference, but his company's travel board listed a retreat in Santa Barbara. I wouldn't have noticed if Lydia hadn't posted a family picture of the lake house and tagged him by mistake. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, was Haley's pink water bottle, the same one I saw in her gym videos, the one with the grind, glow, repeat sticker. I didn't confront him. I just clicked save image and archived it. Confrontation never worked with Daniel. He would shift, deflect, perform. Truth only stuck when it was frozen in time, printed, preserved. So I collected it. Like a tax auditor. Like a quiet undertaker. Later that night, he called from the road. Said he'd be heading to bed early. Claimed the meetings had run long. I said nothing about the lake house. Nothing about the background of that photo. I just asked him if he'd eaten, and he said he was too tired for dinner. I listened carefully for ambient noise, but all I could hear was his breath, even unbothered. That told me more than he realized. Men lie best when they think you're not listening for silence. 2 days later, Haley posted a quote to her stories. The best love comes when you aren't looking. I wasn't even logged in, but a friend forwarded it. The background was too dark to recognize, but the outline of Daniel's shoulder in the blurred shape beside her was unmistakable. His collar sat the same way it always did after he dry cleaned his favorite suit. The timing aligned too closely with the Chicago trip. Still, I said nothing. I made his coffee. I pressed his shirts. I left a chocolate square on his nightstand like I used to. The ones with sea salt he used to say he liked before Haley started doing keto and he decided sugar was low value. That was the phrase he used, low value. He had started talking in phrases like that recently, picking up language from self-help podcasts and leadership books. Once he said, I need people around me who elevate my bandwidth, as if I were a dropped call. That was the second fracture. Not a break, just a splinter. But I remember the moment clearly. I was standing in the hallway, folding laundry. He was on a call with someone, probably Haley, though he called her the assistant to keep up the act. He said I was over-functioning in low-output zones. He meant chores. Meals. Conversations, me. That night I opened the old manila envelope from our prenup folder. I'd memorized most of it years ago but wanted to feel the paper in my hands again. There it was. Section 4. B. The clause that preserved all premarital assets unless joint income was deposited. He never did. Daniel had always insisted on separate accounts, financial autonomy, he called it. I called it insulation. I read the clause 3 times. Then I typed it out on clean paper, double-spaced, same formatting, blue pen heading at the top. Reference material. Clause 4. I didn't know I was writing the letter yet. That came later. This was just my way of preparing, of returning to paper when memory began to slip. A few days later, Lydia texted. She wanted to host dinner. Family night. The kind we used to do more often before Daniel became too important, before Haley started appearing at company events in support roles, before our family dinners became PR headaches. I remember staring at her message for longer than necessary. She meant well, I think. Her world still revolved around tradition. Hosting, passing dishes, seasonal napkin rings. She added a line that changed everything, thinking we could invite Haley this time. She's kind of part of the group now, right? I don't remember typing my reply, but I remember the weight of it. Sure. I'll bring lemon squares. After I hit send, I walked to the kitchen and laid the recipe card on the counter. I had used it every time we had guests over. Lemon was Daniel's favorite. He once said the tartness reminded him of getting hit and kissed at the same time. I made a grocery list, folded it in half, then folded it again. And paused. I hadn't realized how automatic that motion had become. Folding to preserve. Folding to conceal. Folding because things felt more manageable when they took up less space. That night, I watched Haley's latest video. She was showing off a new workout mat and said something about no longer wasting time on toxic energy. I wondered if she knew she was the toxic energy. I wondered if she even cared. Daniel came home late. Kissed me on the cheek like I was a relative. He smelled like citrus and salt, her skincare routine, not mine. I watched him pour himself a drink, one he used to share with me. I asked how Chicago had been. He said, exhausting. Corporate always piles on. Then he smiled, in that weightless way liars do. I smiled back. The next morning, I printed the image from the lake house. Cut out the background. Taped it to a sheet. Then I drafted the letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was exact. A timeline of dates. receipts, quotes, clauses. Attached to it, stapled cleanly, was the HR incident report I downloaded from the company portal using his login, the one he never changed. I didn't have to hack anything. He gave me the tools. I just used them better. When I finished, I folded the pages. 2 folds. Perfect symmetry, no jagged corners. I ran my finger along the crease slowly, like sealing something shut. Then I slid it into my handbag, right behind the recipe card. The lemon squares would be sweet, but the aftertaste that would be mine to deliver. The house still smelled the same. Lydia had a way of making everything feel like the holidays even when it wasn't. She always used rosemary and lemon in her cooking, kept a candle burning by the entry table, and arranged the napkins diagonally, not folded, just layered. Presentation mattered to her. She wasn't a perfectionist, she just believed people noticed more when things looked like someone cared. The front door opened before I could knock. She greeted me with that quick smile she gave when she was multitasking, warm, present, but also already halfway back to the kitchen. Her hair was pinned, her apron dusted with flour. I handed her the dessert and she nodded with approval. Lemon squares were a silent agreement between us. They meant effort without intrusion, presence without opinion. I kept my purse close. The letter was still inside, tucked between the folded recipe card and a small envelope of receipts. The pages were smooth, the creases firm. I had checked twice before leaving the house. Not out of doubt, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it one last time. The living room had been rearranged since the last time I visited. Lydia had moved the sectional to make space for the second dining table, an extension piece she brought out only when more than 6 people were coming. The table was already set. 8 places. Polished cutlery, cloth napkins. The good plates. Daniel's voice carried in from the den. Too loud for the size of the room. He was joking with Lydia's son, talking about football, something casual, something performative. He always projected when he needed the room to know he was comfortable. That was how I could tell he wasn't. Haley's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived, but it showed up 12 minutes later. I knew because I checked the clock when I heard the doorbell. And then the pause, that moment of shared breathlessness as everyone realized who it was. Lydia opened the door and greeted her like a host would greet a +1 at a charity gala. Polite. Not affectionate. Haley walked in with ease that didn't quite reach her shoulders. Her dress was off-white, soft at the waist, designed to photograph well but wrinkle quickly. She brought a bottle of wine, the expensive kind Daniel used to buy for our anniversaries. Her laugh was immediate, loud, the kind that asked for acknowledgement. She hugged Daniel. Too long. Too familiar. Too much for a room full of people pretending this wasn't what it was. Lydia's youngest, Mark, brought out the camera he had rigged on a floating shelf to record their family gatherings. It was plugged into a charger block in the wall, blinking faintly. I didn't ask whether it was recording. I just noted that it hadn't been unplugged. I found my seat third from the left, directly across from Daniel. Lydia had placed me there intentionally. Not out of cruelty but balance. Haley was seated diagonally from me. We weren't facing each other, but we weren't invisible either. The placement was surgical. Lydia's sense of harmony always bordered on prophetic. The room began to fill. Casual greetings. Small talk. The clinking of serving spoons. Daniel commented on my lemon squares. Said they looked like the ones from the bakery. I smiled in return and said nothing. Compliments from him had always carried a passive threat, as if being too good meant I must have had help. The salad course was served first. Arugula and goat cheese, shaved almonds, vinaigrette too sharp to enjoy. Haley commented on the acidity. Daniel agreed with her. Lydia said nothing but refilled her own water. I watched the rhythm of their movements, how small alliances formed and dissolved in real time. Conversation turned toward vacations. Haley mentioned Italy. Daniel joined in with a story about a team-building trip in Venice, one I had not been invited to and one he claimed at the time had been cancelled due to budget. It was almost theatrical, the way the narrative slid past me, like I was an extra in a scene they had already rehearsed. I reached into my purse, not for the letter, but for the napkin I had folded around the dessert fork I brought from home. Not many people noticed. I never used the cutlery Lydia provided. Daniel never noticed at all. The fork had been a gift from my grandmother, nothing valuable, just sentimental. It reminded me to stay grounded, to eat slowly, to remember my name even when everyone else used it like punctuation. The letter shifted slightly as I moved the napkin. I felt the edge graze the side of my hand. It was time. Not to present it. Not yet. But to feel it again. To remind myself it was real. Haley was saying something about promotions and public image. Daniel leaned in, explaining something about managing optics. His hand rested on her knee briefly, then moved. Lydia caught it. I saw her eyes flicker. But her face didn't change. That was her gift, absorbing shame on behalf of the room. The wine flowed. People laughed. I didn't. The table grew heavier with every pour. Every fork scrape. Every polite laugh. I watched Daniel refill Haley's glass, then his own, then look at mine and pause. I had barely touched it. He asked if I wanted more. I said I'd wait until dessert. I don't think he heard me. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. Across the room, the charger light on the camera blinked steadily. The table was set. The cast was present. And the paper, the one with his words, his signature. The clause he forgot sat quietly in the dark of my purse, waiting for its cue. The laughter started over nothing. A joke about football and loyalty, or maybe it was about age gaps in relationships. I wasn't really listening. The words became meaningless as soon as Daniel's voice got louder. That was always the sign. When he needed to win the room, he raised his volume, not his intelligence. People mistook confidence for charisma that way. I knew what was coming before he said it. His left hand reached for his glass in that twitchy way it did when he wanted to say something inappropriate and pretend it was charming. Haley was smiling too wide for someone who hadn't earned a seat at this table. And Lydia was trying too hard to pretend she wasn't already regretting this dinner. He leaned back, dropped his shoulders, and said something that made the entire table hesitate. It wasn't the words not yet but the tone. That shift from joke to jab, the one only someone who used to love you can deliver without blinking. He said it casually, like he was talking about something as simple as a recipe. He said, maybe things would have turned out differently if we'd had a child. If I'd been able to. There it was. The strike. Not loud. Not cruel on the surface. Just sharp enough to draw blood without a visible wound. No one laughed this time. Haley looked down at her plate, as if unsure whether she was supposed to giggle. Lydia stared straight ahead, eyes locked on the center of the table, as if focusing on the candlesticks would keep her from choosing a side. I didn't blink. Pain like that doesn't hit you like lightning. It seeps. It's not a scream, it's a silence that screams for you. I let the words sit in the air for a full second longer than anyone else could bear. Then I folded my napkin slowly, deliberately, and reached for my water. My glass didn't shake. My pulse didn't quicken. If anything, I felt calmer. Because now, I had permission. For months, I had been collecting pain like artifacts. Notes, statements, lies. A photo here, a file there. But I hadn't moved yet. I hadn't drawn the line. Now he had. With a single, unprovoked cruelty. I let my eyes wander to the side of the table where my purse rested just beneath the chair. The corner of the folded recipe card was visible and behind it, the letter. Still unopened. Still whole. Daniel was already moving on, now talking about legacy. About how some families are just meant to grow. Haley nodded, her fork toying with a piece of chicken she wasn't really eating. He used to say we were going to adopt. That love didn't need biology. That families were chosen. Then he chose someone else. It wasn't infertility that fractured our marriage. It was the fact that my pain became inconvenient for his timeline. He wanted ease. Applause. A narrative he could control. I was a paragraph he couldn't edit, so he erased me instead. The table sat in a strange kind of suspended warmth. The room was too well lit, too well decorated, too familiar for something this ugly to sit in its center. But there it was. No one could look directly at it, but no one could deny it either. I waited for someone to say something. To redirect, to pretend the comment hadn't landed. But no one did. They all sat in it with me. The discomfort was communal. That was something. Not justice, but acknowledgement. Daniel lifted his glass again, trying to patch the moment. He started to offer a toast, this one less sharp, more generic. To family. To the future. He was rewriting the moment before it even finished happening. That was when I leaned forward and said a single sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just said it in a way that made the air change. I stopped mid-sentence. So did everyone else. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a defense. It was a reminder. A reminder that not all paper burns. That some things, once signed, stay signed. That you can weaponize silence when you've folded it enough times. I didn't pull out the letter. Not yet. But I let my fingertips rest against the edge of my purse. A silent promise. Not to him. Not to the table. To myself. He chuckled once, nervously. Haley gave a small shake of her head, as if dismissing what I'd said. But Lydia watched me. Not in horror. Not in concern. In awareness, she knew what was about to happen. Because years ago, she had done the same thing. A different man. A different lie. But the same expression on her face. One that says, finally. The rest of dinner moved forward in awkward increments. People forced their way through the meal like it was a contract they couldn't exit early. No one mentioned the comment again, but its echo hung over every bite. And beneath the table, the letter waited. Folded. Ready. The silence was warm again. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that comes just before a room changes forever. Daniel had gone back to trying to steer conversation, something about housing markets, maybe something about business classes, but his voice was wrong now. There was static in it, a fracture he couldn't hide. Haley was sipping water more than wine. She laughed when expected but never initiated the next smile. Her eyes kept darting to me. I wasn't performing. I wasn't playing along. That's what unsettled her. The one who smiles least often becomes the one everyone watches most. Lydia began clearing plates, a little too early. No one stopped her. Ritual was easier than reckoning. Daniel leaned in to talk to Lydia but kept looking at me. He could feel the shift in me now. The boundary had moved, and he wasn't sure where the edges were anymore. I used to give him the benefit of the doubt, now I was giving him distance. I reached for my purse as she returned with the dessert plates. The folded lemon squares sat in the center of the table like a gift that couldn't sweeten the air anymore. I placed the fork beside my plate, smoothed my napkin, and then with a calmness I had practiced only in dreams pulled out the letter. I didn't announce it. I didn't frame it. I simply placed it in front of me and began unfolding it slowly. One crease, then two. The paper let out a soft release, the kind of sound that's only audible when the room is holding its breath. Daniel stopped talking. Haley shifted in her seat. Lydia's hand froze halfway toward the dessert platter. I let the final fold open flat across the tablecloth, smoothing it once with my palm. The ink hadn't faded. The words looked just as certain as they had the night I wrote them. Then I began to read. The first paragraph was clinical, a simple timeline. Dates, travel records, email threads. No interpretation. Just facts. That's what Daniel hated most, when truth didn't need embellishment. The second paragraph quoted the company's own HR handbook. Breach of conduct, misuse of power. Disclosure obligations in relationships with subordinates. I didn't read it to shame him. I read it because people forget that paper speaks without needing to raise its voice. When I reached Clause 4B of the prenup, I slowed. That was the line he had signed with a different woman in mind, a woman he hadn't yet decided was disposable. Clause 4B. Separate property remains separate. No commingling of accounts, credits, or equity unless explicitly merged in writing, co-signed by both parties. Daniel had never co-signed anything. Not the house. Not the investment property. Not the retirement plan. Every financial move he made since the day we were married had been separate. Out of precaution, he said. Out of respect for transparency. But really, it had been out of strategy. So I had applied the same principle. When Haley came into the picture, she didn't know that the company she now worked for, the one she thought he partially owned, was protected under my name, as via a silent trust funded by the initial down payment I had made before we were married. He had used it as leverage. I had documented it as ownership. I explained all of this in the letter. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just factually. Across the table, Daniel didn't move. Haley's face was caught somewhere between confusion and dawning recognition. She didn't understand every legal detail, but she understood tone, and the tone of the letter was absolute. I read the final sentence of page 1. Per the language of Clause 4B, All separate property remains fully protected and recoverable under named ownership in the absence of co-signed amendments. The room didn't explode. It dimmed. Daniel blinked, twice, like he was trying to keep control of his face. No one spoke. I didn't offer interpretation. I let the letter sit where it landed, open, clear, irreversible. For years I had accepted blame by default. Infertility, emotional distance, the failure of our marriage, all assigned to me by tone, if not always by name. And now, for the first time, my voice wasn't raised, but my authority was. Haley reached for her water again but didn't drink. Her fingers trembled slightly. Daniel's chair creaked. Not from movement, but from the tension of restraint. Lydia placed her fork down softly and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her stillness said enough. I said nothing more. The letter had been read. The silence could do the rest. The letter still sat open on the table, but no one touched it, not even Daniel. The edges had curled slightly where my fingers had pressed too hard during the fold. But the rest remained flat, unbothered by the discomfort it caused. Haley looked down at the pages, but not as someone looking for understanding. She looked the way a person looks at their own reflection when they've just realized they're the villain in the photograph. Lydia cleared her throat softly, not as a cue to move on, but as a human response to pressure. People sometimes forget that silence has weight. It settles in your body. You feel it in your shoulders, your stomach, the way you hold a fork. Daniel still hadn't spoken. He'd always been quick to defend himself, quick to redirect the narrative. But not now, because this time, I hadn't left space for a story. I had closed the loopholes. I had used his own words, his own clauses, his own initials. He looked at me the way someone looks at a locked door they used to own the key to. I leaned back slightly, breathing evenly, letting the discomfort stretch. It's one thing to read a letter. It's another to realize it wasn't the whole letter. That's when I reached again, not dramatically, not performatively, just intentionally. From behind the open pages of the letter, I slid out the second sheet. It was shorter. Not handwritten. Typed. The font was smaller. The tone more sterile. It didn't need warmth. It was an HR document. I placed it beside the original letter, letting the staple glint faintly in the light. The moment was quiet, but sharp. A shift you could feel in your ribs. Haley blinked once, slowly. Her breath caught, not from reading, but from the knowing. That knowing that lives in the body before it's ever named aloud. She had filed it. Of course she had. Months ago. Maybe when she thought she could pressure Daniel into something more than an affair. Or maybe after he promised her permanence and forgot to deliver. Either way, the paper didn't lie. It was filed under her name. Complaint number 22 to 471. Title: Improper Personal Conduct, VP level. It hadn't gone to litigation. But it had been archived. And Daniel had assumed that because I didn't work in his world, I didn't know how to find it. He forgot that the password to the company system was the same one he used for our joint streaming account. He also forgot that I had helped him write the very policy that governed managerial relationships when he founded the firm. That was the irony. I wasn't just a wife. I had been a co-architect. A silent builder behind the brand. And when he decided to rewrite the story without me, he didn't change the foundation. I watched him read it the second page. His face didn't move much. Just his hands. He turned them slightly inward, fingers curling. He wasn't holding anything, but he looked like he was trying to keep from dropping something anyway. Haley reached for her wine but missed the stem. Her hand shook. The glass tipped and tapped against the table, but didn't spill. Lydia didn't flinch. I didn't read the page aloud this time. I didn't have to. The heading alone was enough. The date, the timestamp. The words, formal review completed. What I had done wasn't revenge. It wasn't even exposure. It was alignment. For the first time, everything he had tried to bury lived in the same space. Quiet. Undeniable. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again. I wanted him to speak. Not to apologize. Not to explain. But because I wanted to watch him try to see what he would grab for when the narrative stopped obeying him. But he didn't. Haley pushed her chair back slightly. The motion was subtle, but it said more than anything she'd said all night. She wasn't just uncomfortable now. She was preparing to leave. That was when I spoke. Just one line. The kind of line that doesn't ask for a reply. The kind of line that clarifies roles in a room, and still no one touched the paper. The stapled edge gleamed. One small piece of metal, pinning a man's self-image to the timeline he couldn't escape. He couldn't undo the policy. Couldn't erase the filing. Couldn't reframe the evidence without turning the table over. And even Daniel, for all his flaws, knew when destruction would make things worse. The story he had crafted, loyal husband turned resilient entrepreneur, uplifted by a supportive new partner, didn't fit anymore. Not in this room. Not with these witnesses. Not with this paper. He didn't need a judge. He had an audience. And the audience wasn't applauding. My fingers rested on the edge of the document. I didn't move it. Didn't push it forward. I didn't need to. I had already stapled the truth to the letter. And the weight of it had shifted the whole table. Dessert was untouched. The lemon squares sat in the middle, bright and untouched, like an offering no one wanted to accept anymore. Lydia quietly collected the salad plates from the sideboard. Her movements were careful, slow. As if anything too fast might cause the room to shatter. Haley finally spoke, but it was a whisper, an apology made without words. She looked at me, then at Daniel. Her eyes didn't hold fire. Just fatigue. She knew it was over. Not the affair. Not the image. The illusion. The part where she believed Daniel was going to save her from the parts of herself that were still unsure. Now she knew. He couldn't even save himself. She stood without announcing it. No explanation. No farewell. Just the subtle shift of a chair leg scraping against hardwood and a woman trying not to make a sound while her life was silently detonating. Haley didn't make eye contact. Not with Lydia. Not with Daniel. Not even with me. Her hand brushed the edge of her wine glass, but she didn't take it. She didn't look back at her plate. She left everything on the table, food, fork, fragments. Her heels made soft sounds as she moved across the floor, each step unhurried, as if rushing would make the moment too real. She reached the door, paused briefly with her hand on the handle, and then pulled it open just wide enough to disappear through. The click of the door closing was quieter than it should have been. It didn't slam. It didn't signal anger. It simply confirmed absence. No one followed. No one tried to stop her. Lydia didn't flinch. She continued stacking the untouched plates, one by one, as if the act of clearing dinner could somehow clear the discomfort. Daniel didn't move either. His chair had become his prison. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him now, like he had been forced into prayer without knowing how to pray. The paper was still on the table. The letter. The stapled page. Still visible. Still aligned perfectly between the dessert forks and the lemon squares no one had touched. I didn't reach for it. I didn't fold it back up. I wanted it to remain exactly as it was, flat, exposed, a monument to truth. For years, Haley had been the unsaid thing between us. The half-smile on Daniel's face after late nights. The new cologne he claimed was a gift from a client. The Thursday shirts that smelled like lavender when mine smelled like lemon. And now, she was gone. Not in rage. Not in denial. But in quiet ruin. That was the power of proof. It didn't always destroy in flames. Sometimes it just removed the oxygen. Daniel inhaled as if he might finally speak. But he didn't. Whatever words he was gathering dissolved before they formed. He looked at me with eyes that used to recognize me and now only recognized consequence. The man who laughed when I cried about motherhood. The man who told me some people just aren't meant to be parents after our second failed cycle. The man who refused to talk about adoption unless it meant headlines. That man had been loud, proud, and self-assured. This man, the one in front of me now, was quieter. Smaller. There is a particular stillness that arrives when someone realizes they've not only lost, but that the loss was self-made. That no one betrayed them but themselves. Haley's seat sat empty now. Her napkin still folded. Her glass still full. Her exit wasn't dramatic, and that was why it worked. There was no redemption arc waiting at the door. No final apology. No slammed keys on the table. She had seen the documents. She had heard the silence. She had realized her role in someone else's damage and chosen to vanish. Lydia finally spoke. But it wasn't to me or Daniel. It was to no one in particular. A soft murmur about tea. About needing something warm. She exited to the kitchen without looking back. That left us, me and Daniel. Not facing each other. Not fighting. Just, there. He exhaled once. Not a sigh, just a release of something he had been holding too long. Ego, probably. I didn't ask him anything. There were no questions left that mattered. Nothing I needed from him that paper hadn't already delivered. I watched his gaze fall to the stapled page again. There it was, a boundary he couldn't talk his way around. A record. A timestamp. A history that didn't bend to his charm. That was the thing about evidence. It didn't care how sorry you were. His voice cracked when he finally found it. But it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an excuse. It was just a whisper of my name, like saying it might undo something. Like reminding me who I was to him might remind me who I had been. But I wasn't that version anymore. The version who wrote letters hoping for love had died. The version who folded pages in silence now opened them in front of witnesses. I stood slowly. Not out of anger. Not to storm out. Just because I was done sitting. I left the papers on the table. I didn't need them anymore. Their work was done. Daniel didn't ask me where I was going. He knew. You don't chase someone who just handed you the truth. You stay in your seat and learn how to live with the echo. And the echo was already growing louder in that room. Lydia returned from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. She didn't ask if Daniel wanted one. She didn't even glance at him. She just placed a cup in front of me and sat down. There was nothing ceremonial about it, no sugar cubes, no tray. Just 2 mugs of something warm between women who had both stopped pretending. We didn't speak right away. Not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been said without words. Sometimes conversation is the most inefficient way to understand someone. Daniel was still seated across from us. Still unmoving, still avoiding eye contact. The letter was still on the table, but no one touched it. It had transformed from document to artifact. A piece of shared history we weren't going to bury. Lydia sipped her tea without flinching. She didn't blow on it, didn't stir it. Just lifted and drank like it was muscle memory. I watched her movements, deliberate, clean, practiced. She had hosted hundreds of dinners. Made thousands of cups of tea. Set thousands of tables. And yet, in this moment, she wasn't hosting. She was witnessing. The light had shifted slightly in the room. The sun was lower, the candles shorter, the air thicker. The lemon squares in the center of the table hadn't moved. Finally, Lydia spoke. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask how long I'd known. She didn't ask what I planned to do. She just said, softly, "It's always paper that saves us. In the end." I didn't reply right away. She continued, staring not at me, but at the papers on the table. I kept the receipts, too. Every letter, every notice, every insurance claim he said he filed but never did. She was talking about someone else. Not Daniel. Not tonight. Someone from before. You don't forget how it feels. Being treated like a blank page, like you're only useful when they need to write over you. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't even soften. It just existed. Like truth does when it's been aged properly. I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief. Not anger. Something older. Something inherited. I looked down at my napkin. Still folded. Untouched. She saw me glance and smiled, faintly. I used to fold them like that, too. Thought if I made everything look beautiful enough, it would stay together. I asked her then, quietly, did it work? She shook her head. No, but it gave me time. And sometimes, that's all you need to build a different ending. Daniel stood suddenly. Not forcefully, just suddenly. Like he had remembered his body again. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, to no one in particular, and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, toward the guest bathroom. We let him leave. He wasn't the center of this moment anymore. Lydia placed her cup back on the saucer with a softness that felt sacred. Then she looked at me directly. You know, she said, they think silence is agreement. They think if we don't scream, it means we're okay with it. I nodded. But sometimes, she added, silence is just preparation. Sometimes it's sharpening. I smiled then. Not out of joy. Out of recognition. There it was, the bridge. The sisterhood not built on pity, but on pattern. She reached for one of the lemon squares. Finally. She cut it cleanly with her fork, took a bite, and closed her eyes for half a second. Still perfect, she said. Even after all that. That's when I knew we had shifted. This wasn't just my confrontation anymore. It was a continuation. A link in the chain of women who document quietly, survive loudly, and pass down the skill of knowing when to speak and when to let the paper do it for you. We sat like that for a while. Just two women and a table full of everything men once thought they could hide. No one cleaned up. No one folded anything. The paper stayed exactly where it was. So did we. The house was too quiet now. The kind of quiet that feels like something sacred just happened, or something holy had just broken. Lydia rose slowly, collecting her teacup, not in service but as ritual. She paused, glanced once more at the table, then nodded toward the hallway. A gesture that said, "You know what to do now." I stood. There was no dramatic breath, no sigh, no spine stiffening. Just the ordinary movement of someone who had already decided. Daniel hadn't returned from the hallway. I didn't wait for him. I left the letter on the table. I didn't fold it. I didn't tuck it back into my bag like a souvenir. I wanted it to stay there in the house. On the table. In the same air he would have to keep breathing. I walked to the door and picked up my coat. It was exactly where I'd hung it earlier that evening, before I stepped into a house pretending to be a family, before truths began to unfold in front of candles and side dishes. I didn't rush. I moved like someone packing up a season of their life. No theater. Just completion. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't call my name again. He stood close enough for me to feel his presence, but not close enough to ask for contact. That space between us, it used to be intimacy. Now it was a boundary. He waited. Maybe for an apology. Maybe for closure. Maybe just to hear me say one final thing. But I had nothing left to give. There are no goodbye speeches for someone who already laughed at your pain. No closure for someone who folded your worth behind a mistress and a business meeting. All I gave him was silence. Not because I was withholding, but because I had already spoken on paper. With clarity. In ink. With evidence. He had received everything I owed him. I opened the door. The air outside was sharp with autumn, cold in a way that felt new, not cruel. Like permission. Behind me, I heard Lydia step into the hallway. She didn't interfere. She didn't soften the moment. She simply watched. A witness. A sister. A survivor. Daniel exhaled. A faint, breathless sound. Still, I didn't turn around. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door with the same calm that had guided every moment since I placed the letter on the table. No slam. No punctuation. Just ending. The street was quiet. A single porch light glowed across the road. My car waited, parked exactly where I'd left it, like a tether I was finally ready to cut. As I walked down the steps, I remembered the way Daniel used to wait in the car while I got ready. Always honking once, like his time was more important than mine. Now he was the one standing still, watching me leave. I reached the car, unlocked it, and paused before opening the door. Not to look back, I never looked back. Just to breathe. Not inhale pain. Just air. Just peace. Inside the house, a man sat in ruin. Not just because he had lost a mistress or a marriage, but because he had underestimated the one thing he couldn't own: the woman he betrayed. And inside that dining room, a letter sat. Still open, still stapled. Still mine. A reminder that not all stories end in tears. Some end in documentation. And the most powerful exit is the one where you say nothing, but leave everything behind that proves you were right. I didn't start writing the letter to be read. At least, not by him. It began as a way to stop unraveling. A way to catch myself in the middle of those endless nights where the silence in the bedroom was louder than any argument we never had. I wrote it one afternoon after my second consultation. The doctor didn't look at me with pity, just statistics. She said the odds were unlikely, but not impossible. But even that word unlikely clung to my skin like shame. I remember walking home in the kind of days that makes everything seem like a memory before it's even over. The city noises blurred. The people passed like ghosts. And somewhere between the second traffic light and the bakery on Main, I realized Daniel wouldn't ask how it went. Not because he forgot, but because he didn't want to know. That was when I knew I had to write it down. Not for him. For me. I needed to create something that couldn't be interrupted. Something that wouldn't get laughed over or dismissed. Something I could control. It started with a title, If I Vanish. That's what I wrote at the top of the first draft. Because that's what it felt like I was doing, slowly, silently, respectfully disappearing from the life I had helped build. The first paragraph was messy. I didn't even spell check it. It was mostly anger, short, clipped, untethered from grammar. But by page 2, I had started to remember who I was. Not just the wife. Not just the woman sitting across the table from a man who made infertility jokes under candlelight. But the version of me that signed legal documents, negotiated contracts, read the fine print on every prenup clause he thought I didn't understand. I stapled the second page the same day I found the HR complaint. Not because I needed more evidence, I already had enough, but because I wanted the weight of it to be literal. 2 pages, 1 staple. 1 truth, 1 consequence. I kept it in my desk drawer for months. I pulled it out once a week, not to change anything, just to remind myself that it existed. That I had given voice to the parts of me he tried to quiet. When Haley showed up at our friend's birthday party in the red dress I once wore on our 2nd anniversary, I didn't speak. But that night, I printed a fresh copy of the letter. When Daniel skipped our appointment with the adoption counselor to close a client dinner, I didn't cry. I took the second page and had it notarized. Not because I planned to file it. Because I wanted to watch someone else see it, confirm it. Make it real. And when I got the dinner invitation from Lydia, the one with both our names printed neatly at the top, I knew. That was the place. That was the stage. That was the room where the page would finally be opened. I didn't plan every line. I didn't rehearse how I'd place the paper on the table or how long I'd let the silence sit before unfolding it. What I did plan was my stillness. I knew I wouldn't flinch. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. Because the version of me who needed his response had already died months ago. The woman who walked into Lydia's house wasn't grieving. She was documenting. And Daniel, for all his charm, his confidence, his crowd reading, didn't know how to read silence. He didn't know how to respond to a woman who wasn't begging for attention, but commanding it without noise. He didn't understand that the most dangerous kind of truth isn't screamed, it's presented. Flat. Typed. Stapled. I remember the moment I slipped the folded paper into my purse. The letter sat beneath a recipe card, Lydia's lemon squares. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. One was sweetness preserved, the other was truth prepared. By the time dessert was served, I knew I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to let him hear his own echo die in a room where everyone else had stopped clapping. When he made that joke about motherhood, about legacy, I didn't wince. Because he didn't realize the trap he'd walked into wasn't baited with rage. It was baited with facts. He expected deflection. He got documentation. What I wrote wasn't beautiful. It wasn't literary. But it was exact. And that's what made it powerful. Not the grammar. Not the formatting. The fact that it couldn't be denied. There's a silence that comes after you've said everything that ever needed saying. Not peace. Not satisfaction. Just absence. The kind of absence that confirms something toxic has finally left your body. And as I pulled out of Lydia's driveway, as the porch lights faded into the rearview mirror, I realized something that made my fingers steady again on the wheel. This wasn't the end of a marriage. This was the end of my silence. The apartment was smaller than the house, but it breathed differently. Nothing about it needed to impress anyone. The walls were white, not because I hadn't picked a color, but because I liked the way morning light bounced off them. I had one plant. It was alive. That felt like enough for now. I hadn't replaced the furniture. I bought new pieces deliberately unshared. There was no echo of someone else's preference. The couch was soft, not stylish. The kitchen table was round, not dramatic. And I baked. Not often. Just once a week. Enough to fill the room with a smell I had chosen. Not inherited. Not borrowed. Not part of any past holiday meal where I smiled too wide for photos. Lemon squares. Mine weren't Lydia's. They weren't perfectly even or dusted with symmetrical sugar. But they were warm. And they belonged only to me. I took one out of the oven and set it on the windowsill. It was raining lightly, the kind of soft drizzle that made the city slow down just enough to notice itself. The papers were gone now. Not destroyed. Just archived. The letter, the second page, the signed filings, the notarized timeline. All stored, labeled, sealed. They didn't sit on my desk anymore. Because they didn't need to. I had already read them out loud to the only person who needed to hear them. Myself. The divorce was uncontested. There was no trial, no fight, no clawing over property. Daniel didn't speak. His lawyers did. My signature was clean, direct. So was my exit. I didn't watch him walk away. That wasn't the point. He left in silence. How fitting. Lydia sent me a card last week. No words, just her recipe. It was handwritten. She signed it, from one archivist to another. I hung it on the fridge. Not with magnets. With tape. Staples had done their job now, it was time for softer things. I hadn't seen Haley since that night. I never would again. But I thought about her more than I expected to. Not with anger. With curiosity. I wondered if she had started writing, too. If she had figured out that the fastest way back to yourself isn't through rage or regret but through record. Through the things you write when you think no one else will read them. I stepped outside onto the balcony with a cup of tea in one hand and a lemon square on a napkin in the other. There was no noise behind me. No voice asking what I was doing. No interruption about the dishes or the inbox or the afternoon meeting. Just me. Whole. Quiet. Complete. I hadn't needed a child to become a mother. Because I had raised myself back from silence. I had taken every insult, every laugh, every dismissal, and turned it into a document. I didn't publish it. I didn't post it. I didn't even reread it. Because it didn't exist to be consumed. It existed to make space. And now, space was all around me. Some stories don't end in fireworks. They end in fresh air. In room to breathe. In a fork cutting into something warm that only you made, only you plated, only you get to enjoy. I finished my tea. I smiled at the sky. Then I turned the page of the book I had been reading, not about healing, not about betrayal. A novel. With romance. And magic. Because life had returned. Not suddenly. Not loudly. But truly. And it was mine now.